So Mary brings an illustrious career from the high fashion world, contributor to I think 13 different editions of Vogue. She's now very active in her own sustainability consultancy and practice. And she'll be able to talk through how she's leaning into innovation and helping legacy brands lean into innovation as part of a sustainable practice. You know, retail stores selling physical product, but looking forward to where there might be a digital product. So Mary, when you work with bringing your fashion experience, when you're working with brands on sustainability as a practice and what that looks like, what's the conversation with legacy brands now about phygital or digital lines?
It's a complicated one. And I have kind of various positions on it, and some of those conflict, but I'll outline it. So first of all, the sustainability conversation gets very complicated because a lot of brands don't know how to tackle it. And during the pandemic, a lot of legacy brands, instead of carrying on investing in sustainability to get towards net zero, they then diverted a lot of that funding into Web3 and metaverse. And so a lot of us in the sustainability community got very upset. We're like, really? Do you really think the world needs more skins? And is this responsible? But you can't stop that, right? So knowing that in future, consumers aren't just going to be consumers of brands, they're going to be fans. Like hear them referred to now as fans a lot. And big brands, legacy brands are behaving kind of like big entertainment industry figures, like they have their fans and their consumers, and those things cross over. And so when I say to brands, it's like, if you're going to innovate into Web3 and either do skins or do metaverse activations, go for it. Because A, it's going to be another way to get consumers to engage with your brand as a fan or a user or a consumer or in your ecosystem, in your community, in a way that their digital footprint will be significantly less than the footprint as if they were just consuming product. That applies more actually to fast fashion or the lower end volume players, because the footprint of those items is terrible, whereas legacy brands like Hugo Boss or Gucci or Prada, those things don't tend to make it quickly to landfill and incineration or charity shops, right? So there is that. But I'm not against the idea of all of that innovation into Web3, as long as it's done mindfully, because the amount of activity and data mining and energy intensity that comes from that is quite significant. Like the power consumption is insane, the footprint is significant. So I think a company has to acknowledge that elephant in the room. If they're going to encourage all of that digital activity, they've got to acknowledge the amount of power that's going to use, and that won't be power they're paying for. Somebody else is paying that cost, right? So there is that. It's a small thing, but it should be considered. And then the other thing I always say to legacy brands is like, don't just innovate for innovation's sake. Don't just go and do a whole set of skins or create digital fashion because you feel like you need to be relevant. If you're doing it, there's got to be intent and purpose, and it's got to be an extension of your existing brand pillars. Or if it's a new brand pillar, you've got to own that as a new brand pillar. But don't just do it because you think everyone else is doing it. Because it's going to be so competitive, and it's still really confusing for a lot of customers, that whole thing. So translating the red thread from the brand's DNA into that is essential as well. And I think there's the last thing to point out is that in future, what I hope and see is that the girl who goes out now and spends £4.99 on a Sheen gold disco dress that she wears once and tosses, right? You hope that the reason she's doing that is just for content. She's not really doing it necessarily for how she's experienced in the room on that party or whatever. It's more for her content because she wants her digital life to have that experience. So the idea is in future that they will then go and buy the skin, and that piece will never involve extraction of raw materials, virgin oil, slave labor, and then end up in landfill clogging up the planet, right? So in that respect, digital fashion could alleviate some of the footprint and the damage that fashion does to the planet by giving users the ability to express themselves through fashion in a digital manner, as long as those emissions are offset somehow responsibly. Here endeth the lesson.
I love that, and that's a perfect kind of lead into
we're talking about sustainability, and we're talking about general impact and purpose, given that we are in a crisis, the world is on fire. There's also, not just in terms of the avatars and the metaverses and the skins, there's another piece of digital innovation in legacy brands, and any brand that I think will really come to bear in the next 5 years or so when the EU's regulation around digital product passports kicks in. Now, I don't know if has anyone here in this room ever scanned a QR code? I haven't, yeah, okay. So imagine if in future, whenever you buy a piece of clothing or an accessory or whatever it is, it comes with its own digital ID. That digital ID bakes into the brand's ecosystem, and therefore, whatever happens to that item, you should, as a consumer now, be able to get as much information about that product as you do from from food that you buy. If you buy food, you get the calories, the ingredients, the nutrition. You should be able to find out if it was Bangladeshi slave labor or it was, nuns working under the full moon who wove your cotton, right? And you can't, but you will have to very soon because of thanks to the EU, God bless them. But in future, you'll be connected to that brand in perpetuity, and where brands are going to not only be more purposeful and more responsible about staying connected to their customer after the point of sale, is they're going to be able to gather invaluable proprietary data back off the behavior around that item. So did it wash well? Did you repair it? Did you sell it on the secondary market? Did you trade it in? Does it have its own digital ID, which has got an NFT or a token attached to it? And what's the activity and the engagement around that item? Are you plugging it in on social? So there's a whole other way using digital product passports, which is what they're called, which means you can get better customer loyalty. Once the item, you don't want to wear it anymore, or it's worn out, you take it back. They've registered it, you've got the code, they give you a voucher for bringing it back, you can then buy something else. And that way, it's like Apple versus PC world, right? Like in Apple, you go back and you're always welcome in that brand's ecosystem. The same thing in fashion, and that is one of the most important things to do is if you're going to bake in this digital innovation into any brand, legacy or not, there has to, I think, be this acknowledgement of how you stay in touch with your customer to make sure that you avoid sending things to landfill, and you also can make better profit, like on... an item that if you take a commission on the repairs and the resale rather than just letting everybody else own that, you can, there's this case study we did for this white paper, we wrote about this for the British Fashion Council in the white paper, and a Ghani trench coat study we did, it would cost $500 to buy new, and Ghani could have made back £385 on the post-transaction life cycle. End of. So it's a revenue stream, consumer loyalty, it's not just about let's save the whales and the penguins, it's like let's also innovate our business model. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah,
and there's you guys
like a
probably
tag
all...
team.
Yeah, I know.
I like it.
We can have to do it. There's this thing called the behaviour attitude paradox, in particularly amongst Gen Y and Gen Z, right? They've grown up in the shadow of climate change. They've grown up as digital natives. They want the world to stop being on fire, but yet they still want to spend 6 hours a day in the metaverse. And how do you square that? Yeah. And that can kind of be squared by embedding this innovation, where as long as a brand doesn't think that the metaverse and skins and NFT departments over there, and then the digital product passport thing goes over the sustainability people, and those two won't. Like, if you can bring them together, you can then help surmount this behavior attitude paradox of consumers wanting to be purpose-driven and more mindful of the environment, but also wanting to consume fashion, being fans. That's one way.